how do you become a backend developer if you're a front-end developer. And I think it makes sense because most of us actually start with something a little simpler like HTML, CSS and JavaScript, and then maybe move on to a little bit complicated things. So in this video, I want to give you a practical hands-on breakdown of what you should be doing to smoothly transition yourself to backend, as well as, you're already doing front end. So it's effectively just becoming a little bit of full stack, right? But this video would be suited more towards beginner and people who have not really done a lot of backend development. So let's take a look at what you should be doing. If you're new here, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. This is free of cost and helps the channel grow. First of all, if you're not following codedamn's full stack learning path for this, I would highly recommend you to do that. For that, you can just go to codedamn.sh/fullstack. But what this would allow you to do is list down in order whatever I'm going to talk about in this video and learn that in order as well, and all the interactive exercises and everything. So it's all good stuff. Make sure you check it out. All right. So anyway, the first thing I'm assuming, because you already are a front-end developer, you are aware about HTML, CSS and JavaScript. I'm not assuming that you're a master in JavaScript, but I'm assuming that you have your fundamentals or your basics at least cleared out, because your backend journey would, again, just like we talked about in the other video, your backend journey from front end would have a bridge known as API, right? Because at front end, what you did is you pretty much, if you did any sort of dynamic application, what you did is you connected it with API, most likely with JavaScript, not with just HTML, CSS, and then you sort of displayed some data on the screen. Now, the very first reason you need a backend is because you will now be able to create programmable APIs yourself, right? If you want, let's say, a login, or if you want a data dump, or if you want to do any sort of database manipulation. So any sort of thing which you want to do, you need a backend for that, because you need an API for that. So your very first task as a front-end to backend developer transition is to learn how to build APIs, learn about APIs, right? And what an API really is, it's nothing fancy. It's just an endpoint like API/getUser, right? Any sort of endpoint on a website which probably returns you some data in either JSON or XML or any sort of standard data exchange format, and that's it. And it's doing some sort of computation and manipulation or whatever on the backend. That's all it is. Now, in order to build this, let's take a step back and actually understand what a backend really is. A backend is a computer, just like a computer which this person is browsing. But the difference here is that this person actually browses inside a browser called Chrome or Firefox or Edge or Safari or anything. A backend runs a script which most likely has access to all the operating system resources. Chrome only gives certain limited amount of access to this JavaScript right here. For example, you can check the date and the current time and maybe the online status of the computer, but you cannot really create a new file on their system until you have the permission, or you cannot really just shut down their computer or destroy anything, right? Because the program is running in a sandbox. Your backend most likely is not running in a sandbox. So what it can do is that it can open a port on your operating system where it hosts its server, and the server actually hosts an API, right, which your front end then consumes. So in order to learn about APIs, you need to learn how you program the server, right? The script which is running. So because you already have a lot of knowledge about JavaScript, I would say not really a lot is required, maybe even a fairly bit. Your best way to get started on backend is to use Node.js. And this is again my personal preference. I'm not saying this is the best solution out there. I'm not saying this is something which is applicable for everyone. But if you're somebody who's looking to transition from front end to back end quickly and you want to become full stack, Node.js is the best option because you will not have the cognitive overload of switching a programming language. Node.js is not a programming language for the 1000th time. If I did say it is, that's my mistake. It's a runtime. The programming language is still JavaScript, right? The programming language is not Node.js. It's a runtime which gives superpower to JavaScript on your server. That's all you need to know. So pretty much whatever your functions or if else or switch case or whatever variable understanding you have from the front end, all of that is exactly the same, not even similar, it's same on Node.js. So learn this language and learn about how you can set up APIs, learn about how you can set up HTTP, and let's start the list of a little bit of topics now, because now you have the idea about how to really just, move. What's the day one work? The day one work for you is to figure out what Node.js is, get started with it, and create your first API. That's the day one work for a front-end developer. All right, so now that we have a clear picture of how you start basically by learning a programming language or a runtime in our case on the backend, or a runtime like Node.js. And again, I recommend Node.js, but there are options like Rust or Go or C# or Java or anything you want. But as a front-end developer, it will be easiest for you to switch to Node. Then the second step is learn about HTTP protocol, DNS, and a bit of networking if you haven't already. This is like very relevant and very important if you're trying to become a backend developer, because you will be working with HTTP a lot. You will have a bunch of DNS problems and you will have a bunch of networking issues as well to sort, right? So learn about these things next as a front-end developer. The third thing you should be learning about are something known as databases. Now, databases are just a backend, kind of. Think about databases as another backend for your backend. You have a client here, you use APIs to communicate with this backend server. This backend server uses a set of more APIs, which sometimes we call like SQL queries or regular DB queries. But this is again kind of same, right? So this is front end, this is back end, but in this case, this is front end and this is back end, right? So it's kind of like Inception. It's like a backend within a backend, this database. So you want to learn a bit about databases. NoSQL or SQL, both are fine. I believe they both share a lot of common things. People just argue about them without any reason. Initially, if you're just learning, pick up any one and learn about databases in general, because you will learn a lot about databases, indexes, how data is stored, how it is retrieved, pretty much in both the cases, both the scenarios. And then once you have a preference, or even if you don't have a preference, you can just stick with what instructor says and build a very small application or a medium-sized application with it as well. I think at this point, what you have to do is obviously build a lot of applications, because databases, programming language, and this HTTP tech stack is pretty much all you need to build any sort of project, or I should say like most sort of projects, at least locally on your system, right? So if you're running on, local host, then you can pretty much build anything on your own system as a front end and as a back end. The deployment is like another layer on top of that, but you should focus a lot on if you're able to even build something with all this knowledge of databases and backends and front end. After building, you should learn at least about one area where you can deploy your backends, right? And I'm not talking about Vercel or these managed services or anything. Don't fall into the trap of ease right now. You should be picking something like EC2 or a Droplet, some sort of full server, right? Don't really have an abstraction just yet. So pick up some raw hardware, some raw infrastructure, and deploy your backend over there. Because when you do that, you will learn a lot about IP addresses and security rules and port numbers and this and that and 100 other things. So make sure when you're deploying it on an infrastructure as a service. You don't want a SaaS, software as a service deployment yet, right? I won't even prefer like Heroku out there, because Heroku, I also guess, also provides a lot of convenient options with Git and GitHub and so on. So use some infrastructure as a service and don't fall into the SaaS loophole or SaaS rabbit hole just yet. And finally, once you have learned about how you can deploy, the last thing you need to do is how you can secure. Now, when I mean security, this usually just means how you can do data validation, because most common security issues come from the place where you trust user input. That's it. So data validation is a big thing. For example, using libraries like Joey for data validation or schemas across your whole backend. And in general, following secure code practices like, least permission or sandboxing your backend in a certain way, or just following some, not really trying to introduce a lot of bugs by opening your databases to public IP addresses and so on. So in general, your last step, or one of the last steps, or this could be like even shuffled a bit, spread across all these steps, is to learn about security as well as a backend developer. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Clear roadmap, I hope, for a person who's trying to shift from front end to back end. And I believe you have to start with this, the very first step, the very first day which you have to follow. And you're gonna find all of that on codedamm's full stack learning path as well. So make sure you check that out. We have a lot of courses over there which are interactive. So it's gonna help you make this transition a bit smoothly. A lot of courses are there, a lot of projects are there, which will have you create these backends as well. A very common question which I get asked a lot is that, hey, I'm a backend developer. What should I learn in order to become a front-end developer? Or hey, I have this much experience with Java or this much experience with Ruby or C# and I have worked with backends. How do I get into front-end web development? And I'm gonna take this video to go through how, as a backend developer, not as somebody who's new, there's a difference, how as a backend developer you can approach front-end. Because I do believe that if you have some experience with programming and you have some work experience as well, there might be a different strategy to approach front end. Okay, so just to bring everyone on the same page, let me just quickly define what do I mean when I say that you are a backend developer. When I say you are a backend developer, I am assuming that you know at least one programming language that runs on the servers, right? This could be pretty much any language of your choice, Java, C, even Node if you want, or any other language. And I'm assuming that you have a basic understanding of working with servers as well, right? So when I say servers, I usually just mean Linux and the utilities which you get with it. SSH, for example, just regular bash usage, understanding a bit about file system in Linux, how files work, what are permissions, how do you do common operations with the shell, how do you log in into a server and set it up. You might or might not have a bit of idea about reverse proxies and how servers really work. If you want to know more about them, I have a lot of videos on that, but this is like a general idea if you're a backend developer, right? And now you're trying to get into front end. Instead of like directly jumping into front end, I would recommend, if you're a backend developer, you should make a smooth transition. Like, first understand why you even need front end, not as you, but in general, why do people need to work on front end? So for that, I am assuming that if you have worked with the programming language, you would have also created some sort of HTTP server in that programming language, right? And if you have created an HTTP server, chances are you have also created at least one REST endpoint. And REST endpoint is just a fancy way of saying that you have created some sort of API, right? So if you have created something like API/1, which just gives you hello world, that is a regular API. Now, front end is the part which the consumers are seeing, right? Which consumers are seeing maybe on their mobile phones, maybe on their laptops, maybe on their desktops and so on. So you want to learn front end because something needs to consume this API, which is still very low level compared to what people are used to, and convert it into a graphical user interface somehow with buttons and screens and scroll bars and everything, which people are now very much comfortable, right? This is low level. This is like converting it into a little bit friendly. Now, the common ground between backend and front end is what I feel is APIs, right? You would be writing APIs as a backend developer and you would be consuming APIs as a front end developer, right? So I think the first transition which should help you a lot is your first project should be around something which just consists of APIs, right? And the best way for this is to pick a starting project which involves authentication somehow. Because as a backend developer, you, I believe, also have some knowledge of databases, but as a front-end developer, you don't need to have that knowledge, but it will help you build a full stack project. And when I say authentication, what I mean is that you create a front end, you learn something in the front end, which is like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And bonus point if you're coming from a Node.js backend, because you already have this much figured out, pretty much, 60-70%. All you have to learn is the HTML and CSS part, and then this programming language of the front end, and then connect it to a backend of your choice. One great application to start, which uses APIs and databases and would help you make a small front end as well, is some auth-based application. So my first tip for you is create a minimum viable kind of application which involves your backend knowledge and forces you to build a very small front end, and it should not be any framework. I mean, just starting with HTML, CSS, JS is fine. My number 2 advice would be to actually start a lot and spend a lot of time with HTML and CSS, not particularly JavaScript, and I'll tell you why is that. Because I feel that as a backend developer, you already have experience with programming languages, right? You understand the concept of variables and functions and returns and switch cases, if else, and this and that. These two things pretty much don't have that at all. Now, people get upset when people say HTML is not a programming language, but it literally says in the name hypertext markup language, so we cannot ignore that. CSS is, I think, in fact, a programming language. I'm not sure if CSS is Turing complete, but CSS has a lot of more things you can do, especially with CSS3. So what I would recommend as a backend developer who's transitioning into front end is stick and spend a lot more time with HTML and CSS, because these two are the things which might catch you off guard a little bit, right? JavaScript would be comparatively simpler for you if you're coming from a programming background already, because this will be just a knowledge transfer in terms of syntax and how you do things. But HTML and CSS are fundamentally different, even for a programmer who has done some programming in any particular language, right? So when I say HTML plus CSS, what I mean is once you create your MVP project, try to make it more beautiful, right? Make it more beautiful in the sense, play with the project as much as you can. Try to add new front-end features, not necessarily involving JavaScript. Try to practice with the layouts. Try to understand the core concepts of how the box model works, for example, in CSS. And I could list down a few important topics, but the thing is you pretty much need to do this anyway. So consider like any single resource. I would recommend stick to one single resource, whether that's a single course you have bought or a codedamn full stack learning paths initial sections, which are the free front-end HTML, CSS, JavaScript lessons. But stick to one section and consume it completely before you move on. HTML tags is also one thing. Browser APIs, you have to understand a bit. This is basically involving a little bit of JavaScript world, but browser APIs is something new, because browser at this point is almost like an operating system which has a lot of its own APIs and its own hacks and tricks you can do. So making sure that you are able to understand those things is important as well. But at the end of the day, I would say like front end is again something which you would understand much more if you're starting to build projects. So pick up any sort of website. My one suggestion, which I give to a lot of people, is just go to any sort of website, Facebook, codedamn, Google, anything. Just pick one site and try to clone the landing page of those websites, right? That's like the simplest approach. You just go to any website and figure out how you can build the landing page for that website. Now, you don't need all the fancy animations and this and that, but just a couple of things. Get the layouts right, get the font sizes right, get the images and the dimensions of things right, and you are more than enough. Because the other things which are animation and colors and this and that, they can be customized, and they usually have a lot of support as well. For animations, for example, there exists a lot of great libraries, although you should learn about that in CSS as well a bit. But you want to focus a lot on layouts part, the dimensions part basically, and font sizes is basically just something which can come inside dimensions. But these are like 2-3 things which you want to focus on when you're trying to learn, because these are the things. I'm not going into things which are common with the backend. I'm going into stuff which you might struggle with a bit, even if you're a backend developer. And the final thing which I want to say is you should be sticking to a single browser, whether that's Chrome or Firefox. I would not recommend Safari if you're coming from a backend developer, because you might not know, but Safari kind of is becoming the new IE, that is Internet Explorer, in terms of talking about APIs and the support for modern syntax. So it might happen sometimes that if you're learning about something new in JavaScript or even sometimes in CSS, that might not be supported by Safari, right? So you want to stick with Chrome, learn all the things in that, or Firefox, that's fine. And then for Safari, we do have solutions, right? We do have polyfills, we do have code generators which can help you just make sure the Safari thing works, right? So don't stress a lot about browsers when you are making the shift, because you will see a lot of different behavior. Stick to either Chrome or Firefox and don't go with Safari. That's my advice. So yeah, these were like 4-5 tips in order to start front-end development as a backend developer. If you haven't started yet, you can check out CodeDamm's full stack learning path. In fact, the fun thing is that you can start front-end web development completely, absolutely for free. And the added advantage is that that is like a one-of-a-kind course because you get to learn about front-end development without leaving your browser. So you practice, you build projects, you do everything right inside your browser. So it's super convenient for you. So check out the link. Link for the courses are in the description. Let me know what you think about this video in the comments below. That is all for this one. I'm going to see you in the next video really soon. If you're still watching this video, make sure you comment down in the comment section, I watched this video till the end. Also, if you're not part of CodeDamm's Discord community, you're missing out a lot on events which we organize on a weekly basis to code. You already know the drill. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and thank you so much for watching.